Hi there, Pete here from Radio.co. So when flicking through your radios, you may have came across commercial stations and community stations. You may have also wondered, what's the difference between these radio stations? What makes a commercial station and what makes a community station? Well, in today's video, we're going to cover some of the differences between commercial and community stations. Now, we won't go through the differences between equipment because we all use different equipment, be it commercial or be it community. The only kind of difference between equipment is budget. Commercial stations have a much bigger budget, so you may find their equipment completely out of our league. However, the biggest difference between commercial and community stations, or one we all think about, is the audience. We all think of stations like Capital in the UK or Heart of having this big audience, whereas local community stations have a much smaller audience. Now, this is done for many reasons. Capital, for example, have a much bigger budget, a much bigger advertising budget, but also they have a bigger budget to buy bigger transmitters, to have bigger licenses, which cover much bigger areas, whereas community stations target a much smaller area, normally a local area of 10 miles or so, and they have a small dedicated audience. Now, obviously, with systems like Radio.co, you can broadcast on the internet and you can get out to much bigger audiences. But touching on the traditional FM radio, we all know commercial gets a bigger audience than community. Now, that has benefits in terms of they may be able to get bigger artists on the station, they may be able to get bigger competitions running. It also has disadvantages where lots of people are listening. There's also a greater chance for those people to stop listening because there's so many stations out there. If they hear a song they don't like or an interview they don't like, they just switch over. Now, in commercial radio, you rely on advertising. Advertising relies on audience numbers. So for commercial stations with these big audience numbers, they get big advertising packages. But when these audience change so quickly because they don't like something on the radio, the advertising goes down, commercial radio lose money. Whereas community radio, whilst it might have a smaller audience, is much more target based. So that audience is tuning into that local station because it wants to hear something on their local station. They want to hear an interview with a local person, a local artist, they want to hear local music, or they want to hear something about their local area. They're much more inclined to stay listening for longer and they're much more dedicated to those stations. However, as we all know, advertising for local and community stations can be much harder to come by. So this is why you'll find a lot of community stations are funded by some fundraisers done in the community. Some stations charge volunteers a fee to broadcast, almost like you'd be paying to do a club of your choice. They also may get grants from their local council, from the government, and so on. However, in the last couple of years, especially with the pandemic, it's really given community stations a chance to show where community radio can excel, and that is targeted local information. So people might tune into their local community station to find out exactly what was happening local, especially with restrictions changing in local areas. This was really essential. Now, in some areas, you will find the council were funding these stations to play what they call public service announcements, or PSAs. Now, these were targeted local adverts to tell people what was going on in the local area in terms of restrictions.
This is a vital update about coronavirus. To help save lives, stay at home. Anyone can spread coronavirus. Only leave your home for the following reasons.
This is where community radio can really excel over big commercial radios because community radio doesn't need to be scared of who it's targeting. So what are the pro points of a commercial station over a community station? Well, with that bigger audience we mentioned earlier, it might be a lot easier for a commercial station to obtain certain things. They might be able to get a big artist, for example, to come on the show. They might be able to host a big local event, for example, whereas community stations may struggle with that. They also have bigger teams. So for example, a commercial station might have 10 people working on an event, whereas a community station might have one person. That one person might even be a volunteer, so their time is limited. A commercial station has the time and resource to throw at events and throw at interviews, whereas local community stations may not. So whilst we can see there are clearly some benefits of commercial radio in terms of resource and commitment and money, there are also a lot of benefits to community radio in terms of as a radio station as a whole because it can target that local area much more precise, but also in terms of the teams who are on those stations. So most presenters on a community station are volunteers, and most of these presenters are allowed to get away with a little bit more than they would on commercial radio. For example, they're often given more flexibility in terms of the songs they play, how long their interviews are, and the style of show. Yes, most community stations still have a breakfast and drive time show. However, in the daytime, they're allowed to get away with a little bit more than a commercial station. They're not having to stick to that strict format that a commercial station might be. However, that said, and whilst the presenters are allowed to be a bit more freestyle on a community station, they do have to abide by strict requirements from Ofcom. These requirements are usually called key commitments. Now, key commitments are usually decided before a license is given. Those commitments can sometimes cover how much local time that station has to do, the content they have to do, e.g. we have to do 60% talk radio, 40% songs. And these rules are very strict. They have to abide by these rules, otherwise they could get fined. Commercial radio doesn't really have those rules in place. So you can see there's a bit of benefits of a commercial station and a bit of benefits of a community station. So if you're watching this video and you want to get into community radio, what's next? Well, we spoke to Dom Chambers, the chair of the Community Media Association here in the UK, who are the body for representing community radio, and he gave us this advice.
I think there's a huge appetite for local radio, and I think during the pandemic, COVID-19, the emphasis on your communities, keeping connected with others in your community, and one of the mediums, one of the ways to do that, one of the routes to succeeding in that is through your community radio station. There's a number of what you might call profit-making or commercial groups coming together to deliver a more commercial local radio offering through the SSDAB opportunity. But I would always say, whether you're a profit-making company or a non-profit company, anybody doing local radio has to have a community at heart. And there's no point in just pumping out a load of pop music that they're doing on the regional and national services. There's got to be a point to local radio, and whatever makes local radio fantastic, unique and listenable to, and having a big place in the market, has to factor those in, whether you're in it for shareholders or in it for volunteer or community gain.
So there we go, that's been a run through of the pros and cons of both commercial and community radio. As you can see, each one has many pros and cons, and you really need to decide how you're going to run your radio station. Do you want to be a more targeted local station or a bigger, more generic commercial station? Only you can make the choice to see what's the best for your listeners. If you have any tales of triumph from the stories you've done, even good stories or horror stories, let us know in the comments below. And whilst down there, give us a cheeky like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. But for now, that's it from me, Pete from Radio.co. Take care and happy broadcasting.
And just before you go, how would you like to launch your very own online radio station? Surprisingly, it's a lot simpler than you may think. And the absolute best way to get started is by chatting to myself or another member of the Radio.co team. To do that, just head to radio.co/demo to schedule a video call with us, where we'll discuss your plans, answer your questions, and of course, guide you around the Radio.co software.